All of us have been disappointed because our expectations were higher than what actually happened in reality, right? It's all of us, and that's just a thing. It's not a church thing or an American thing. I just think it's a person thing, and by products especially, right? And maybe that's due to advertising. I mean, have you ever seen the chicken sandwich or the Whopper that's advertised on TV, and you have never actually had one that looked or tasted like that? I don't know. There are actually food stylists who make pictures of food look just fantastic. And that's, I don't know about you, but in this age where we sort of buy everything at Amazon, it's amazing how many times that it's just shocking when I actually get it. I'm like, that is not what I was picturing at all. And so, but it's not just products. All of us have had disappointments where we had high expectations for an experience, where we saved for a vacation, or we went to that concert that everyone said is great. Or how about movies? Like, how many times you've been prepared for, oh, this is going to be the greatest movie ever, and then you kind of walk out and went, that's it, or that's couldn't have been it, or so we've had those experiences where our expectations are very high, and I think this is probably especially true, not just products or experiences, but right now I love the fact that you can sort of go on Pinterest or Google or any number of sites and sort of see how to do something. I don't know if you do that, but I do that all the time, like any sort of home improvement or painting or like right now we're doing a stone fireplace. We're putting that stone on a fireplace, and I went out and I looked at Houzz and Pinterest and all these to get ideas for that. Or especially I think for baking, I don't know, we've done this too, where you get this picture from someone who's really talented, and then you make that thing, it's amazing sort of how you get these expectations that something's going to be beautiful, and then when it's actually executed, I had to laugh in the opener that jack-o'-lantern. That probably was the experience of most of us. Like, you see the jack-o'-lantern, like, wow, that's amazing, and you get the little tools with the plastic handles and the stencil, and you go, I can do that, and it looks nothing like that. It's like, oh my goodness. But here's the thing about that. I think all of us have experienced high expectations, right? Something or someone or some experience or some product, and you come into it thinking this is going to be great, and then you're just disappointed, or maybe I got to be careful how I say this, but have you noticed people's profile pictures? It's hard to pick them out in the crowd when you actually meet them. I'm just saying, like, it's weird. Like, all of these things we have in our world, we sort of present everything in the best light. So it's very, very easy to be disappointed because we have high expectations. And so what comes of that is that our high expectations disappointed and sort of put down, and sort of from experience, we become a little cynical, or we become a little, I don't believe anymore. And it's easy to go from, I have high expectations and my hopes have been dashed a million times, I've been disappointed, to really getting low expectations. Like, I was talking to someone yesterday who I really admire, but they were saying, like, I don't believe anything anyone says to me in a business deal anymore. And I was like, I kind of get that. Like, you just understand that because we've been disappointed and because we've been burned, it's easy to go the other way, isn't it? Like, get to a point where you're just cynical and kind of jaded, you don't believe anything, and you don't look forward to anything because, I've been burned before. And here's the thing that we know. And this is something we know from studies, that incorrect expectations, like too high or too low, just being wrong in our expectations, they affect us in how we experience both pain and pleasure. Like, we've been talking about the pleasure part in the sense that, like, if you really expect that this is going to be the greatest vacation you've ever been on, and then man, those hotel sites, I don't even know how they do that. You talk about what modeling agencies do. Have you ever walked into that hotel room and you go, how is that possible, right? Like, this looks nothing like, I mean, it does. You kind of look at your iPad and go, yeah, it's the same place, but I think they use that wide angle lens. And so the fact that we have high expectations and then doesn't live up to the expectations, that can decrease our pleasure in something. But pain is also true. I was reading a study. In fact, this is probably why your doctor says, hey, when you get a shot, you go, hey, we're going to feel a pinch or you're going to feel pressure. You know, they always say that and then it really hurts. They do that because, and your dentist might say that as well, because studies have been done that if we minimize something that's going to hurt, we minimize pain and we go, this is going to be fine, you're not even going to notice this, and then just the slightest little needle stick and you're like, oh, it hurts more if we're not expecting anything. But if we sort of say, this is going to feel like getting your limb torn off by a rabid lemur. Let's go back to the last one. I don't know how that would happen. But if we really maximize the pain, we find, and studies have shown that like if we raise the expectation of pain too high, people will feel more pain even if it's not normally a painful procedure. So doctors and dentists, and what's the difference between a dentist and a sadist? Jerry Seinfeld said better magazines. I don't know. But anyway, like the doctors and dentists, they sort of try to give us a midline thing of pain and say you'll feel a pinch, you'll feel pressure, you'll feel something because they realize, like all of us realize, that our incorrect expectations affect how we experience things. No matter who you are, if your expectations are incorrect, it's going to affect you. Now, here's why we're talking about that in church. Because I think that's especially true when it comes to our relationship with God. I think that many of us, in fact, I know this is true, and I know I've experienced it, and I talk to people all the time that have experienced this, that we have incorrect expectations of what it would be like to have a relationship with God. We just spent a month, 5 weeks talking about having a relationship with God and how that works and sort of where we're at in that. But I want to spend this month just talking about like if you're in a relationship with God or you're considering being a Christian and having a relationship with God, what can you expect? Because on one hand, I think there's some of us, in fact, I know there are, that we walk into it sort of expecting something magical. And we're wrong about that, and it really can dash our hopes. Like we expect that, oh, because I'm now a Christian, or because I got baptized, or because I made this change in my life, like everything's going to be better, and the bills won't come in next month, or if they do, I'll have plenty of money to pay them, and our relationships we'll never fight again. And we have these really high, super sort of magical expectations, and then we're disappointed. And then just like anything else, I think some of you here this morning, in fact, from talking to you, I know this is true, you've sort of been so burned by church and by Christians or people who said they were Christians and by religion that you walk in sort of with such a low expectation that I don't think you're getting everything you could out of your relationship with Christ because of either too high or too low. And so I wanted to spend the time not sort of trying to tell you how to feel. I wouldn't do that or, hey, I've already told you you're wrong like 7 times. That's what I do. But just even though that is true, I want to talk to you about a story in the scripture that you probably don't know and you probably haven't heard. And it's funny, like I didn't even remember all this. And I grew up in church. My dad was a preacher and I read the Bible. It's an interesting story. And it's an unexpected story. And so we're going to kind of learn all month from this one story. And I'm going to read you and tell you the story this morning, or most of it. We're going to save a little to the end, of someone you wouldn't expect as a Bible character. Now, it's an Old Testament Bible character. Now, we sort of, as Christians, that's what Christians do. We borrowed, at least, Jewish scripture. The first part of the Bible that we call the Old Testament is basically Jewish prophets and the Torah. And so we just kind of brought that over because most people were Jewish, and it's the God of the Bible that we worship. So we have that. And so this is an Old Testament character, not a Jew. And this is really weird if you're familiar with the Old Testament or with the Bible in general. a woman, which there's not that many women in the Bible, not because women weren't important or not because women didn't change history, but because in that culture, you didn't write about them because they weren't valued like we value women today. So it's a woman. We don't know her name. Now, immediately you think women in the Bible, you imagine two scenarios because these are pretty much the only, either like Mary, this amazing, wonderful, or a warrior princess like Deborah, or a little old widow with nothing. It's the penniless widow or this amazing, and the lady we're going to talk about today isn't either. She's sort of a mom that would live on your street. She's not remarkable in the fact she didn't lead an army, and she's middle class or higher. She's not poor. In fact, she's sort of well off. She drives a brand new minivan. This is the mom we're talking about today. And she's got all the screens and the game. I mean, she's got everything. So she's good. And she doesn't do anything like, you also imagine when you think of who would be mentioned. I mean, just think about this. Like, we're going to talk about a woman who lived like 6,200 years ago. We don't know her name, but her story's been carried through history. Well, she must have done something pretty amazing. Not really. Very, you can sort of imagine being this woman, I promise you. And I think that's important when it comes to expectations, because I don't know about you, but a lot of times I read the Bible and I'm like, yeah, but that's a Bible character. Well, I'm not Peter, I'm not Paul, I'm not like them. But here's the thing, and for the record, I believe that we're like all of them because they were just people as well. But it's easy when you see the amazing things they did to kind of go, oh, I don't know if I could be that person. But I guarantee you, this lady, you will sort of go, yeah, I can see that. So let's just jump right in. This is taken from 2 Kings 4, and it's the story of the Shuma Knight woman, which right now you're like, yes, I've been waiting to hear. Finally, I came on a Sunday that we talk about the Shuma Knight woman. No, you don't. You've never heard of this chick. But anyway, it says, one day Elisha, you probably heard of him, one of the most famous prophets in the Bible. One day Elisha went to the town of Shunem, and a wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. And after that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. And she said to her husband, I am sure this man who stops in here from time to time is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. And he will have a place to stay. So imagine this. There's a wealthy woman, at least upper middle class in this time, because her husband, we learn later, is a farmer. She sees Elisha preaching, brings him into her home for a meal, really goes, I think this guy's the real deal, supports him. And she has this amazing power, which all of you ladies have. And let me just tell you about Action Church. Anything you like about Action Church, I did not do. Like the fact that you had donuts when you walked in, not my call. Honestly, when we first started Action Church, we put out donuts on the test drive Sunday, and then the next week, my wife, Michelle, went to pick up the donuts. I was like, whoa, we cannot afford that every week. And she was like, well, of course we can. And I said, what if the church grows and we need more than 2 boxes of donuts? She's like, we'll buy more. And I go, oh, I don't think that's going to work, So just the fact that you walked in and there's a spread of maple donuts, not my fault. Like my wife said, we will do this, and so we did. And anything you like about this church, I guarantee it was some lady or my wife in general who said, no, that's what we're going to have because it's good. And so this lady had that power. She literally, she said what you ladies do that is so powerful, let's build a room onto the house. That's what she said. And her husband said, yes, ma'am, I'm on it. So that's exactly how it happened. I was talking a couple weeks ago. If you missed this, you missed something. We had our bonfire at the Perko farm. And I thanked Steve. I said, my goodness, Steve, this is amazing because they had bonfire and food. If you were there, you know what I mean? We thanked them. I walked away with 2 pumpkins. It's who goes to a party and walks away with pumpkins? I mean, it was crazy how generous and it was this crazy party. And he kept saying, oh, Leah did that. And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure you had to help pay for that, right, Steve? So thank you very much. But that's the story. This is a woman, and it's such a powerful, powerful thing. And I'm so grateful that, and you should be too, because every good thing at Action Church did not come from my idea, because I'm pretty stingy. We'd be sitting on a folding chair, and I'd just be yelling at you right now with no donuts and no coffee, definitely. But anyway, so that's what happened. So that's the picture of this lady, and they have plenty, and she takes care. So right now you're like, well, and I would be too, going, nice lady, like really kind heart, and but how does this make this into Scripture? So the story goes on. It says, one day Elisha returned to Shunem. And so this had to be an awesome thing for Elisha. Like, he keeps going there, and she's got him set up with a place to stay. It's kind of like his, bed and breakfast. It's awesome. And he went up to the upper room to rest. And he said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her." And when she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern that you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you with the king or the commander of the army?" "No," she replied. "My family takes good care of me." Later, Elisha asked Gehazi, "What can we do for her?" And Gehazi replied, "She doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man." "Call her back again," Elisha told him. And when the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, "Next year this time, you will be holding a son in your arms." "No, my lord," she cried. "Oh, man of God, don't you deceive me and get my hopes up like that." But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant. And at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elisha said. I want you to notice, Elisha wants to reward her. And he basically says, what can we do for you? You've gone above and beyond. I mean, this is amazing. This Airbnb that you have set up here, where I just come in and I don't have to pay for it. It means a lot, because every time I pass through here, I'm cared for. And he's like, "I have influence with others. I'm a famous prophet. What can I do for you?" I autograph prophet jerseys, whatever you need, tickets to the prophet. I don't know. I don't know how any of this worked, obviously. But instead, he's like, "Well, I'll talk to the king. Whatever you need, I want to help." And you notice one thing she didn't expect, talking about expectations, she didn't expect anything. In fact, she turned down something, a word with the king. And this is interesting, because it's we think word with the king, but this is a pretty cool deal. I don't know if you've ever known a congressman or and go, "Hey, if I had problems, I could talk to them." And that's basically what he was offering. Even more than that, the king, the power, the guy who, can make it happen for you. I'll introduce you. I'll put in a good word, whatever you need. But she didn't expect to be rewarded at all. And it's funny, because this whole story is something that she probably did from what we see of this really incredible lady. Just, hey, that's what we do. I don't think this is the only time she'd ever been kind. She was just like my wife, just a kind person. And so, Vinny, yes, it was kindness today. I love when he goes, "I don't think I have the right thing, but here's my song." No, you are right. She just did this kind thing for people, and I'm sure she did it for everybody. And in fact, I know that because people like that, who just have that generous spirit and that kindness about them, they do it all the time. They do it so much that it's sort of no big deal. And that's kind of like, she's like, "I don't need anything. My husband's wealthy. I have whatever I want. Whenever I want a room built onto the house, he says yes. So I can do whatever, so it's pretty cool." But here's the thing, and I want you to notice, and I was reading through this thinking kind of from her perspective, she doesn't expect anything, and then he kind of goes to the one thing that has to be painful to her. Not having a child for any of us is painful, but we have options at least. We go, well, we could adopt, or maybe we could get some sort of treatment, there's all sorts of options, even if they're difficult, even if they're expensive. And we don't sort of depend on our worth as a person, being that we have children or don't. There's the option of just not having children. But here's the thing, we could get 2 dogs. That's what we could do. Not in this time, not having a child, not having an heir, devastating. This is kind of probably Elisha went to her worst fear, the saddest thing, her just her biggest regret in life is that their marriage had not produced a child, and her husband's an old man, and it's just not going to happen. And so one thing we know she expected, right? Just reading the story and sort of getting into the head of this woman of Shunem, she expected to be disappointed. In fact, what did she say? She's like, "I don't want to hear that." I love this lady. She's like, "Don't you get my hopes up. I don't want to even hope for that." And I read that, this woman probably hoped for that every year for the last who knows how many years. Like that next year this time, I'll have a baby. And then it gets harder and harder to imagine that. And finally she gives up and she goes, well, I'm okay. I have a life. I have a husband. I have this thing where I serve others and I care for others and I've created this world. And now all of a sudden this stupid prophet's like, oh yeah, you're going to have a baby and it's impossible. And I don't know about you if you've ever experienced that, but when you've had high expectations and then they've been dashed so many, many times like hers had, after a while, like the one thing you don't want to do is get your hopes up. You don't want to be disappointed. Like you don't want to feel that pain. So we know that she expected just to be disappointed. She's like, oh, prophet, do not say that to me because I don't want to be. And here's the amazing thing. She didn't expect a miracle to happen, but it says 1 year later, sure enough, just like Elisha said, she had a baby. I mean, that's an amazing story. And I think we can relate, most of us, to that. Like, yeah, we hope for miracles. Maybe even pray for miracles. Maybe even believe in miracles. And quite possible we think that miracles happen and we've seen them happen to others. But when it comes to our everyday life, I think a lot of us, in fact, probably most of us would go, yeah, I can relate to this woman going, I don't expect for anything that good to happen to me, no matter what anyone says. I believe in God, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so I can kind of relate to her, and I hope you can too, and maybe specifically this morning, just going, you know what, I'm past that. My disappointment meter is just too high at this point, and I just can't imagine anything good is going to happen to me. And now here's where the story takes a turn. It says one day, when her child was older, he went out to help his father, who was working with the harvesters. And suddenly he cried out, well, my head hurts, my head hurts. And his father said to one of his servants, carry him home to his mother. So the servant took him home, and the mother held him on her lap. But around noontime, this is unbelievable, he died. And she carried him up, and she laid him on the bed of the man of God, of Elisha. She lays him on that guest room bed. And she shut the door, and she left him there. And she sent a message to her husband, send one of the servants and a donkey so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back. Why go today, he said. It's not a new moon festival or Sabbath. He's like, why would you talk to the prophet? It's not church day. It's not a festival day. And she said, we're going to talk about this a lot this month. It will be all right. That's what she says to him. It's going to be all right. And so with her dead son laying on the guest room bed, she says, it will be all right. And she saddled the donkey. And she said to the servant, hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you. Now, here's one thing I know. Not trying to be dramatic or not trying to read something into the story that's not in there, but we know that she didn't expect a tragedy to happen, right? In fact, if you didn't know the story this morning, you didn't expect that to happen, did you? I certainly didn't. You just go, that's not how miracle baby stories end, right? Like we had a miracle baby and a prophet came to town and I showed a little kindness to him and he gave me this miracle child and God moved in our family. And then amazingly, we have this child and then he gets a headache and probably has a stroke or something, some brain tumor or something that they couldn't have even known because they didn't have the technology, gets a headache and dies in my arms. My goodness, nobody expects that. But yet, and we're going to talk a lot about this month, like how do you say, like this woman said, it's going to be all right? What does that mean? Does she think like he's going to be healed or she's going to kill the prophet or, like it's going to be all right? Those words have been kind of ringing in my head as long as I've been reading the story. We're going to have to explore them because this is pretty amazing that would be your statement when your child is... I don't know about you if you've ever had a child that was hurt. Like our daughter was in a little not a rocky seat, but like one of those baby seats. And I set her on the table and turned away and she was buckled in and flipped it out upside down on the tile floor. And I will never forget that moment. Like, just bloodied her face, like how much blood can come out of a baby. And we rushed her to the hospital. She was fine. Like, literally, by the time we got we waited so long for the doctor to come into the room. She was like playing with stuff on the wall, but with blood down her face. But it was the scariest. Like, that's the worst we've had with her. But I will tell you that I still remember every moment of that thing. It was my fault, and just going, oh my goodness, like I've killed our daughter. And I can't imagine like what it has to be to lose a child. Some of you experienced that. And then to say, oh, it's going to be all right. It's an amazing story, and we'll have to work through that. But the story continues. We kind of ended up. It said, as she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance, and he said to Gehazi, look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, is everything all right with you and your husband and your child? Yes, the woman called Gehazi. Once again, she said, everything's fine. Everything's all right. But when she came to the man of the God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him, and she caught hold of his feet. And Gehazi began to push her away. Like, what is wrong with her? But God said, began to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She's deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what it is. So he's like, I don't know what's wrong with her, but something is seriously wrong. And then she said to him, man, I can't imagine this conversation, how this felt to Elisha. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, wow, you can just hear her voice, don't deceive me and get my hopes up? Then Elisha said to Gehazi, get ready to travel. Take my staff and go. Don't talk to anyone along the way. Get there quickly and lay your staff on the child's face. He knows something's wrong with the child. But the boy's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, she's like, one of us is not walking out of this room alive if you don't come with me. I mean, literally, it's amazing. Like, I can see moms doing that because they're so strong when baby is hurt. And it says, I won't go home unless you go with me. So guess what? The most powerful prophet in the land, and probably one of the most powerful prophets in the Bible, some of his stories are just amazing. We'll talk about this month. He's like, all right, I'll pack my bag. And he goes back with her. Now, here's what we know from that. Really dramatic, but she honestly, she says it's all right. She expected Elijah to do something. She had an expectation that God, who was Elijah, who worked through Elijah, very clear, he was the prophet of God. He was the sort of hands of God in that region at that time. She expected, like, he's going to do something. He has to do something. And in fact, she would not even put up with, hey, I'll send my servant. He'll take care of this. She's like, no, one of us is not leaving this room alive unless you come with me. And so let's finish out the story. It's a pretty amazing story today. It says, Gehazi hurried on ahead, and he laid the staff on the child's face. But nothing happened. Man, that'd be bad. And there was no sign of life, so he returned to meet Elisha and told him, the child is still dead. And when Elisha arrived, the child was indeed dead, lying there on the prophet's bed. And he went in alone, and he shut the door behind him, and he prayed to the Lord. I bet he did. Could you imagine, like, I cannot come out of this room with a dead kid. And then it said, then he lay down on the child's body, placing his mouth on the child's mouth, and his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on the child's child's hands, and he stretched out on him, and the child's body began to grow warm again. And Elisha got up, and he walked back and forth. He's pacing back and forth, and then he did it again, stretched himself out again on the child, and this time the boy, I love the detail, he sneezed 7 times, and he opened his eyes, and Elisha summoned Gehazi, called the child's mother, and when she came in, Elisha said, here, take your son, and she fell at his feet and bowed before him, overwhelmed with gratitude, and she took her son in her arms and carried him downside. Like, Elijah, I know I read really fast and you couldn't understand, but look up on the screen. But Elijah got so freaked out by this woman and so distraught that he had to raise this child from the dead that he invented CPR. I'm just saying, like, that's pretty much... right? Like, he didn't know that one Mississippi, he didn't know that, but like, he invented CPR and somehow brought this child back from, it's an amazing, amazing story, and made it through Scripture all of those years as one of the stories of the prophet Elijah. And wow, can you imagine like being expected to perform, like, you're not coming out of this room. Like, he was scared to death of the woman of Shunem. We know that. Like, he's like, I'm not coming out of this room with a dead kid. God, we've got to do something here. So that's an amazing story, right? And there's one more little part that we'll talk about in a few weeks. But here's the thing. What should we expect? I don't want our expectations to be too high. Like, I'm hoping none of you are going to hear this and go, I'm I'm going to a funeral later, and I'm going to lay down on this thing and see what happens. I don't know. I won't. That'll be really awkward. Please don't do it. Or if you do, take pictures. It didn't happen. All right. But anyway, like, what do you expect? Like, is God going to raise everyone from the dead, or can we expect miracles every time? Or maybe you go, well, that's a Bible story, so I don't expect anything. Well, she didn't either, and she had a child, and then she saw her child come back to life. Oh my goodness. So I think this month, kind of like where we could go from this is like we need to sort of fine-tune our expectations that we have for God to be followers of God. Because maybe we're missing something on sort of the high end. Like we're not actually getting the full benefit of a relationship with God because we're just simply not expecting enough. That might be possible. It might be possible that we're not sort of holding on like she did with Elijah. I'm not leaving until something happens here. It's going to be all right. Like we need to figure out what that is, I think, this month. Like what is it that in the worst situation I can imagine? I can't imagine anything worse as a parent. She's like, it's going to be all right. And what does that mean? Did she expect that he was going to be healed? Did she expect him to be raised from the dead? Did she expect, I don't even know what she expected. We've got to talk about that. And now, so let's leave with this today, that we're going to wrap it up. Here's one thing you can't expect. And I know this, like just starting our journey of what can we expect from God. Do you know this whole story, it's pretty amazing. Like it happened because she cooked a meal for a prophet. That's not too big, is it? Like she had plenty. It wasn't even like she gave her last meal. She just cooked a meal for a prophet. She basically furthered ministry in her town. Now, I want to read you something Jesus said, and probably looking back at this story and many others in the Old Testament, because Jesus quoted the Old Testament. And when he's talking about prophets, he's talking about Old Testament prophets, so he's probably remembering this story. Matthew 10 says this, anyone who receives you receives me. He's talking to his disciples who are going out and ministering. Anyone who receives my disciples receives me, Jesus, and anyone who receives me receives the Father. So you receive the disciple, you receive me. If you receive me, you're receiving God himself. And if you receive a prophet as one who speaks for God, basically if you show support for the prophet, you will be given the same reward as the prophet. According to Jesus, like that woman who made a meal for Elisha and then made another meal and then said, hey, hubby, you should build she said we, even though I'm pretty sure it was he, but like we build a room for him. She furnished it. They worked together. But it's like we should build a room for him. It says anyone who receives a prophet is one who speaks for God. You will be given the same reward as a prophet. So in God's eyes, what we learn from Jesus is the reason why the story of this woman is in the Bible is because she's just as important as Elisha. And if you receive righteous people because of their righteousness, you'll be given a reward like theirs. And if you give even a cup of cold water to one of the least of my followers, you will surely be rewarded. I want Vinny to come back up here, but here's one thing we can know. We can start this week knowing these words. That from this story and from what Jesus said about this story, we are Christians. If you're a Christian here this morning, Jesus wins. We believe what Jesus said. He said that any even small action doesn't go unnoticed and doesn't go unrewarded. We can trust God to see what we're doing when it comes to kindness and generosity for others, and especially, he said, in furthering ministry. Now, here's the thing we're going to do. We're entering 6 weeks of giving, and it's going to start this week with, we found out that there's approximately 100 students are going to come from Puerto Rico to York City schools, and some of them are arriving, and some will be arriving in the next few weeks and months. And they're going to come with clothes from an island they don't have a lot of winter coats. Let's just say that. And so the school district, we've worked with them before. I don't know, may not remember if you weren't here, but some years ago we did hundreds of coats for York County schools, and they said, remember that crazy church who brought us all the coats for students? These children from Puerto Rico obviously don't come with a nice ski parka, and it's going to get cold, and it's definitely going to feel cold here. Here's the way we're going to start this, and I just want you to test this. And I'm not promising you, hey, give a kid a coat and you'll have something new next week. That's not this kind of thing. I don't want your expectations that. But I want you to just test this out. Like, let's see if God notices and God rewards. I believe He does, and I'm not saying next week. I'm not saying, but you will feel rewarded. So let's start testing this thing out. In a few weeks, we're going to give food to people here in York County, and it's always been part of the ministry of Action Church. In fact, a big part of the Action Church. In fact, most of the things we do here, the reason we're volunteer and the reason we're sort of thrifty in the way we do things is so we can serve people outside the church as well as just buying stuff for ourselves. And so I'd like to see us do something amazing here today. We've got 100 hangers out there with 100 tags on it. Let's clear them out. Like, take one or two. And there's instructions on there, a size, and you can pick through. There's male, female, different sizes on there. And just bring back in the next 2 weeks those hangers with the coat on them. Now here's the thing that'll happen, and we'll have the racks out there. I think you're going to feel great about that. And I guarantee you're going to change some kid's life for not a lot of money. But what Jesus said is even like a cup of water is noticed and rewarded. And I believe you can expect that. And so I wanted church just to try that out, and I think it's a great week to start that in. And then next week we're going to come back and talk about some other things that we can expect. But today I want you to remember that you can expect God to reward you, and you can expect God to notice, even things you don't think are big. Here's the thing about it: like, of all the things that Action Church has done over the years, they all happen like one person at a time. It wasn't something I did or Michelle did or any of the others leaders did. It was the things that really counted were things you did, and I just can't wait to see this happen. So we're going to hear another song. We've got a few more announcements, and then we're going to just clear those racks out. I broke a hanger earlier when we were hanging them. And I realized, like, by breaking that hanger, that meant a kid wasn't going to get a coat. So I took that one. But I was like, wow, that was a clumsy thing to do. And now some kid will shiver. So we took that one. But here's the thing. Like, we can take a couple. But let's just clear these out today. And then we have 2 weeks to bring them back. So let's pray. Dear Jesus, God in heaven, I don't think we fully understand what to expect from you. And it doesn't really surprise me because you are God and we are not. But God, I'm asking you this morning, as sometimes someone who just struggles with this myself, like, can I really expect that you notice when I show kindness and generosity? Well, God, your word says that you do, and this story says that you do. And so, God, I pray that people would test that, and I pray that we would have not only an awesome week of just generosity and kindness and these children will be blessed with these coats. But God, I pray on this church, on this group of friends and family and strangers, that all together we would experience this thing that you said, that you would reward it. In your name we pray. Amen.